This is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Kane Pittman and Olgun with you to break down all the happenings from round 8. And again, there was a lot of craziness right across the NBL. And maybe at the back end, I didn't tell you this, Olgun, but maybe at the back end, just a small NBA discussion as well. Dyson Daniels certainly worth a mention with what he's doing with the Atlanta Hawks right now. But Olgun, you were up in Sydney. I assume you're at the Sydney Southeast Melbourne game. We've said it a lot. But I'm starting to wonder whether this is the season where you don't want to play the team that feels like it is more desperate, because we're seeing a lot of quote-unquote underdogs on a weekly basis, on the night-to-night basis, picking up these wins. And this was, again, a theme right across this weekend.
Yeah, I wonder if... So, okay, something that I've spoken about previously is coaches never don't get fired, right? And this has become a very recent thing. And I think it's because of the increased media scrutiny. I wonder if it's a similar thing now, where the increased scrutiny across the board on teams that are either underperforming or not performing up to par. I wonder if that's something that genuinely does rile them up, get them motivated going into new matchups. So if you are going up against a team that has just been ridiculed or criticized in the media, it's probably not a team that you want to be playing. But at the same time, something that everyone around the league is talking about is you can go into any game and win it. You can go into any game and lose it. There's very tough to find indicators on who's going to win games, because right now it doesn't seem like there's any outstanding team that's about to break away. So, man, this league is very weird right now. But I agree. If there's a team that's motivated, I don't want to go up against them.
So the pinnacle of that thought, or perhaps the poster game for the idea that you can let your guard down and any team will beat you, or you can be an underdog, as I said, for whatever that means in a 10-team league that is very, very even across the board, it would be the New Zealand-Tasmania game. And let's think about how we started the podcast last week with the New Zealand Breakers, and they looked great. They beat Adelaide. They beat Melbourne. They didn't just beat them. They beat the brakes off those two teams. You have a New Zealand team that scores 110-plus points against Melbourne United, who we all believe on paper and certainly personnel-wise, even if the numbers don't necessarily agree after these last few rounds, Melbourne United, best defense in the league. So they score 110-plus points. They score 63 points, 50 fewer points in a game of basketball just 7 days later against this Tasmania JackJumpers team. They win by 20-plus points. No team in the league, maybe Cairns, you can make a case for. Outside of that, no team in the league, you're talking about the defending champions, needed a win more than Tasmania, and they were comprehensive. I walked away and I'm not sure I feel any better about this Tasmania team or any worse about this Breakers team. But that is a result that typifies exactly what we're seeing across the board in NBL 25.
Yeah, I think it's probably more of an anomaly for the JackJumpers than it is the rule, especially over this season. You know, them getting to 80-plus points is like an absolute win for them. And they got to that and they won the game, and good on them. But we know what their defense is like. They are a very well-drilled defensive team, and they look like that against New Zealand. I do wonder if this Breakers team they were due for one of these losses. They picked up some really quality wins over Sydney, in Sydney, over Melbourne, in Melbourne. You know, going to Tassie, it's a really tough stretch of games, this sort of road trip. Yes, they beat the 36ers by a ton, but it just seemed like keeping up this level of purple passionate was going to be really tough to sustain. And then losing Jonah Bolden, I do wonder if you lose someone who's not amazingly productive, but is a significant part of that team. Lose him early in that game, and I wonder if their heads just dropped a little bit. And when the JackJumpers got out to that 10-ish lead, at the half, just after the half, it felt like their defense was going to be good enough to sort of keep them in it. But again, with this league, with this JackJumpers team, all you need is a fighting chance at the end of a game, and you can sort of bet on them not being able to score much. They're able to this game, which again, I think is more an anomaly than the rule. But good on them for getting a win at home. That was one that they needed. It sort of keeps them not in the conversation, but it keeps them right near sort of, not above water, just below water, which is right where you want to be right around this time of year.
Well, it is interesting because you talk about the anomaly and the rule, and even the way that they won in terms of where the offense came from was an anomaly, because a few nights earlier, they go down to Perth and they were pretty good. They scored 80-plus points in that game as well, but Milton Doyle was the star. We've seen that time again. We've seen Jordan Crawford do that. But in this game, you were getting points from everywhere, whether it was Craig Sword, Majuk Dang. played a nice game. Drumic now starting to knock down a couple of those threes. So those role players who, let's face it, this Tassie JackJumpers team as it's currently constructed, they need all the role players to be knocking down the threes, to be active on the offensive glass, and to find ways to score and get extra possessions and extra points. So they did that. So it was a very Tasmania JackJumpers win in terms of the method that we've seen over years gone by, but not so much this season so far. But you brought up Jonah Bolden, which is interesting because this is a point I wanted to bring up from this game because you'll hear it, and you hear it on the broadcast, and you'll just hear it in general basketball discussion about the conjecture about plus minus and what it means for individual games. But over the course of the season, and particularly the longer the season goes, those numbers are indicative of guys that are typically on the floor when good things are happening. And the plus minus isn't due to one player. It's the 5 players on the floor, but it is the plus minus for the overall team. So if you are a player that is an anomaly for your team, or you are significantly higher on that plus minus, or lower for that matter than other teams, then I think you should look into it a bit more and say, how are they impacting the games? And Jonah Bolden, by far and away, the number one player for New Zealand in plus minus. He went out of this game early, as you pointed to. So even though the stats might not look like they are a dominant season or a dominant season for Jonah Bolden, he does all the little things. He has been hitting the glass. He does help space the floor. So he has been an impactful player. And for Tasmania, they've still only got one player that is above 0 in plus minus on the season, and it's Craig Sword. I brought it up a few weeks ago, just wondering, like, what does this mean? Do they need to find ways to get him more minutes? They need to find ways to get him more minutes with the best players on the floor. And I thought we saw it a little bit when you talk about how this team could be disruptive defensively in this game. They had a lineup there where Craig Sword was out there, and I thought he was great in this game defensively, not just offensively. But then you had Majuk Deng, you had Milton Doyle, and you had Gak. So that's your 4 guys. Plus, it might have been Drumic or it might have been Crawford, who Crawford was fantastic on PJC, by the way. But then all of a sudden with those guys, you had a lot of size, you had a lot of length, and you can switch things up a little bit, and you can be a little bit more disruptive. So when I saw that lineup, I'm not saying that Gak is the answer to all problems, because in a perfect world, you have Will Magnay out there. But I thought the combinations were good in this game, and I did think they found something defensively, and they were outstanding.
Yeah, the Craig Sword conversation is so interesting because, like you mentioned, it leads that league in plus minus, that team in plus minus. Like, he had 18 points in this game. So he's been shooting it really well over the past few games, right? He seemingly can't miss corner threes these days. Like, that's just what the feel is. I have a feeling that this could be false hope for the JackJumpers if they expect to get that sort of offensive production out of this guy consistently.
He's not an 18-point-a-game player. I think we know
No. And I still think that the only way for this JackJumpers team to reach any sort of its ceiling is to probably make a change. And unfortunately, it's probably at that spot. So as effective as he's been, as much as I think he doesn't get the minutes he probably deserves, because I think reputationally he's a defensive player, so they think, oh, we need offense right now. We can't play him. We have to play other guys. We have to play shooters. I feel like that does hurt the team in a way, but it also, I don't want them to look at this performance, 18 points against the Breakers, and think, we're good now. Right? We have our guy. Add Will Magnay to this. Add Sean McDonald back, and we're okay. No, I don't think this team's offense is good enough with Craig Sword on that roster in order to achieve like the ceiling that they want, which is another championship. That's my only fear from this game. Don't go like we said. I think this was an anomaly of a game offensively as opposed to the rule.
Yeah, I don't. The Tassie JackJumpers, I mean, they're a smart organization. They're not going to sit back and say,
I agree with you. That's why they're talking about this like privately. But I just want to make sure everyone out there knows that this isn't like, oh, good, like this is what Craig Sword is now. I don't think it is.
No, but my argument would be, now he played 20 minutes in this game. He was plus 24 in this game, which obviously helps the stat I was just talking about. But he was impactful offensively, and ultimately he is a guy that, if he can get you 10 to 12 points, and a couple of those baskets might be in transition coming off steals, a couple might be the corner threes or the catch and shoot threes that he might see. But let's not forget that Milton Doyle only took 6 shots in this game. I'm not necessarily saying that I want to see more of Craig Sword because I think he can bring a more offensive punch. I'm saying I want to see more of Craig Sword because I think that he complements the best players on this team better than some of the other role players. So I think he can help elevate the defense, and you get bits and pieces from him offensively. But ultimately, you want Milton Doyle taking 15 shots, not 6 shots. So the fact they still scored 84 points, they didn't need Doyle to go crazy. They got the bonus from Craig Sword, but I like the mix in some of those lineups with the better players.
You know what? I want Milton Doyle taking 20 shots. I don't want. So in that game against Perth earlier in the week, he played 35 minutes. He had 21 shots. Right, he was 11 of 21. Yes, he was lights out from downtown in that first half, and he took over toward the end of that game. That's what I want from Milton Doyle. He was on absolute struggle streak going into that game. He was shooting sub 40% from the field, sub 30% from three. This was a really bad Milton Doyle season up until this point. The numbers overall are still not amazing, but that performance against Perth, while it wasn't a loss, that's what this team needs from Milton Doyle right now. They need 20 plus shots. They need him to get up to maybe not 30 points a game like he dropped in that game. They need him in the mid 20s at least in order to be competitive. I feel like that's the only way that this team's going to win games consistently.
Yeah, and really just good to see some positivity surrounding this team as well, because it just did feel like they were stuck in mud a little bit. And it's a little bit bizarre when you hear the start. I know they played a couple of games in Launceston, but it was a little bit bizarre, at the start of the broadcast, they kept referencing 34 days without playing a game at MyState Bank Arena is odd. And I know they embrace the whole of Tasmania, but they play well at MyState Bank Arena. Now they get Brisbane there to open this round, so all of a sudden you hope that you can win that game at home and you start to feel good about yourself. So Tassie is interesting. You mentioned the amount of shots that Milton Doyle took in this game, and you want him to take 20 plus. That brings us to points bet built different, because Chris Goulding, he did take 20 plus shots from beyond the 3-point line. He was 9 for 21 from three. He had 25 points in the third quarter. Overall, he had 46 points. And up until that third quarter explosion, he was struggling a little bit. But that's why this guy is different. We've seen him do it time and time again. And this was the peak explosion. He went crazy in that third quarter span. And overall, dragged this Melbourne United team to a win over Perth. Unforgettable performance.
The difficulty of the shots he was taking, the audacity of the types of shots, the inevitability of them. Everyone knew that Chris Goulding was going to shoot the next shot. They knew where he was on the floor. They largely knew where the shot was going to come from, and it didn't matter because Chris Goulding is one of the greatest shot makers that's ever come through this country. The last shot that sent it to sent that entire arena into sort of this chaos was something that it forced a timeout from John Riley. John Riley didn't know where he was on the floor. Chris Goulding just started walking back to his bench. John Riley was sort of looking around and figured, I should probably call a timeout right now. That's what this circumstances probably dictated. It was one of the best shooting performances I've ever seen. We are very lucky to be able to witness Chris Goulding in all of his talent and might, having a performance like that. And it was also the moment of it. It was that team was down double digits in that third quarter, and he almost single-handedly willed that team back to the lead and ultimately to win that game. It was one of the best shooting performances you'll ever see.
Melbourne United down by 14 points at the half, as you pointed to, Olgun. Jack White was off the floor injured, and Chris Goulding carried this team to a big win over Perth. We'll discuss it more, but for now, it's pretty simple. Points bet built different is Chris Goulding.
What are you really gambling with? For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.
You are listening to the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Kane Pittman and Olgun Ulich with you. Let's keep talking about Melbourne United and Perth a little bit, and specifically how this all went down. So last week we discussed Melbourne United and the idea that the concern is that are they one offensive weapon short? And really, are they a number one offensive weapon short? But here's the catch when you discuss this, because you say you watch what you saw in that game, and this is always the case with Chris Goulding, but the degree of difficulty is 99 out of 10. Like it doesn't make sense how hard he has to work, the shots that he has to make to carry this offense, and he is their number one weapon. And so I looked at it and I'm like, man, this is unbelievable. I could watch this all day. I was so disappointed when he didn't make that final three. It would have taken him to 49. It would have been nice if it was for 50. I love the fact that he took the shot. And so on one hand, you're like, this is why you believe that Melbourne United can win any game. This is why you believe that they can have the best scorer on the floor, the most dangerous shooter on the floor. But geez, it was an unbelievable performance just to get this Melbourne United team over the line, understanding there was no Jack White there. But I don't know. I don't know whether you walk away and go, well, this is my confirmation why I think they're going to win the title, or you say, this is my concern why I think they might not win the title.
I think the the retort to that is I thought this was a largely bad defensive first half from this team. And again, it was uncharacteristic from them. And I think that was largely their issue. I didn't think they were that bad offensively in the first half. And it took that insane shot making, but I thought it was the defense that really carried them in the second half. Kyle Bowen, I thought, did a really good job on Christian Doolittle. And obviously, it's not taken away from Chris Goulding. His performance was incredible. It was historic. But their defense is the thing that kept them in the game. Those shots from Chris Goulding don't matter if they're not able to really lock up. And it was Shea Ili, it was Kyle Bowen, it was all these guys really stepping up. So I feel like that's the thing that's like the foundation of this team. But we've spoken about it a lot. We speak about it every year with this Melbourne United team under Dean Bickerman. That's the foundation. And then when we talk about everyone around the league is talking about it. Are they one creator short, one scorer short? Chris Goulding, we know what he is. He's part of that. The question is, do they have something beyond that? And maybe they don't need it. Maybe it's just the fact that Shea Ili and Matthew Dellavedova are solid initiators of an offense, and they can't get Chris Goulding going. Maybe they don't need to have like what the Sydney Kings had with Jalen Adams in the way that Adams took over that game against the Phoenix, or what Adelaide has in Kendrick Davis and Dejan Vasiljevic. They don't need these guys with someone with the ball in their hands like that. Maybe just the gravity of Chris Goulding, the shot making, the threat of the shot making from Chris Goulding is enough. And I think they'll get more out of Ian Clark. I thought he was below average in that game. I think he has the capacity to step up more, but I don't want to take away from this Chris Goulding performance because it made me regret moving back to Sydney. The fact that I wasn't in the building for that game, like, of course, I had to be in Kudos Bank Arena for a freaking 70-72 scoreline, and then you got Chris Goulding over at John Cain Arena dropping 46 points, hitting the craziest shots you'll ever see in an NBL arena. That annoyed me to my core.
So, you know this, but I just got off a plane, and on the plane, I was watching this third quarter again, and I just noted down how he scored in that third quarter stretch, because again, on one hand, this is the perfect scenario to, not that teams should need it explained, but it's a perfect scenario to explain to teams that it can just be one moment. It can be 3 possessions of not quite defensive attentiveness where it needs to be, and you can be done. It can be all over. And for Goulding, who was struggling at this point in time, he missed the 3 early in the third quarter, and Damon Lowry, and he said, CG43 is going to have to get loose. Well, he did pretty quickly after that. And it started with a mid-range bucket. He just got to the free throw line, was able to fade away, knocked it down. It's like, okay, that's great. On the next possession, Almanza just didn't get his hand up. Shot clock was winding down. You got to have awareness that he's going to let it rip. Now, he's a young player, so it's fine. I'm not being too critical, but that was another mishap there. All of a sudden, he's got 5 points. The next one.
Do you know what happened before that possession? That shot over Almanza? Do you remember that defensive possession?
Yeah. Ili.
It was Shea Ili diving out of bounds to save the ball, right? That gave United a possession. It gave them that possession for Chris Goulding to start getting loose, and he went up from there. But that stuff's so important. I feel like that, again, it gets everyone revved up.
No, it is. Those are the moments as well. And particularly that's when the chaos can happen a little bit, so the defense gets a little bit messed up there. So again, not being too critical of Almanza, but defensively, when you've got under 4 seconds on the shot clock and he's just staring you in the eye, he's probably going to shoot the ball. So you got to be prepared for that to happen. A few possessions later after this, he scored a few more times now, and it's Dylan Windler, and Goulding just cruises across the top of the arc, and the defensive player is just below the arc. It's not even making an effort to get to him with any concern that he's going to knock it down. He knocks down another 3. And then a couple of the later 3s were just Todd Withers. I don't know if he was just exhausted, tired, but just not really showing a great level of aggression to try and get through a screen.
Todd Withers had just checked on the floor.
Well, when Rob Lowe just stood there, and the credit to Rob Lowe, he was a big part of how Goulding was able to get free, no doubt. But just really no intent trying to get around or through a screen there, and Goulding just gets open look. So I thought that, and I'd be curious, if John really went back and looked at it, what he thought about the defense. Like, there's guys that you got to be attached to all the times, and there's guys that you just got to be like, look, everyone else can score. We can't let Chris Goulding cruise across the top of the arc and take a catch and shoot 3, like when he scored 20 points in the quarter. So it was awesome for Goulding, but a lot of those shots were like actually easy shot attempts for him, whether it's a corner 3 or to the left wing 3, like. He's too good for that.
Yeah, and then again, when you let him hit those sorts of shots, the slightly tougher ones where you even let him get a catch, which I don't know why you're letting him get a catch. Those ones become easier, right? The hoop just becomes unbelievably big. And that's the one where the one at the top of the key where, Rob Lowe sets this pick and Goulding runs off it. It was the one Jack Everin, you can hear him, he cited the anticipation in the building. It drops. It was the one that forced that John Riley timeout. And then it was right after that timeout. United just got through a bunch of their stuff. They didn't force it to Chris, but all of the attention of that Wildcats defense was on Chris Goulding.
Yeah,
and they got 2 straight buckets out of slips.
Yes.
Right? It was the most predictable thing that you'll ever see on a basketball court, which is the defense overreacting to this guy who is red hot, and United just basically just getting layups or really easy buckets from it. The way you can describe how good this performance was during the game. The commentators couldn't stop talking about how Ben Henschel and Elijah Pepper can learn from Chris Goulding. He's on the floor with them right now. And it's like, yeah, that they should watch this and base this as an example. The next game, it was the Phoenix played. Angus Glover hit back-to-back threes. And who do they use as the example? Oh, is Angus Glover doing his best Chris Goulding impression. A few games after, there was Dejan Vasiljevic hit a bunch of threes. And he's looking like Chris Goulding out here. The fact that it's the thing that everyone compares you to when you start to get on a roll, when you start to get hot. The fact that there's no real NBL comparison for what Chris Goulding did in that 4-minute stretch. Everyone's saying it's like a Steph Curry sort of shooting stretch. It's a Klay Thompson type heater. I think that points to the magnitude of what that performance was.
And just on the season scale, yeah, it's a tough one for the Wildcats. You get that win on the road there. Obviously, they won a few nights earlier against Tassie. They're trying to get back into a rhythm as well, and they're undermanned as well. They have been for a while. This has been a really challenging stretch for those guys, but that's a tough one. It's a tough one to lose there against Melbourne. But Perth, I think over the last few weeks have played decent basketball for sure. You mentioned DJ Vasiljevic, and I am at the point now, because if you look at the numbers, the Illawarra Hawks, on an efficiency standpoint, have the best offense in the league. Quite clearly, the most damaging offense for me is this Adelaide team in terms of the options they have with Montrez, Kendrick Davis, DJ Vasiljevic. They're getting you around 60 points a night, just that trio alone. I think we all understand that depth on this roster is not, in terms of like, what can they get you? If you're missing one of those 3 guys, are you going to be able to pick up that slack? Because we know they're not great defensively. I'm not so sure. But as long as they have those 3 guys on the floor, they look like they can beat anyone right now. And that's why I thought, and I've said this before with Illawarra, there was possessions in this game where they just switched off. And so part of me was disappointed because this is a big game here on the road. You should be trying to make a statement in this game. But then the other part of me is like, feels pretty, it doesn't feel like that's not something this team can fix. And we've seen them in big games earlier this season look pretty solid defensively. So I wasn't too concerned either way. But clearly the big takeaway is just this Adelaide team. I still don't know. I don't know how I like them in a 3-game series or a 5-game series later in the season. We'll see if they're going to continue to gel. We still haven't seen a lot of Jarrell Martin, who is showing flashes that he's starting to get into shape. But geez, the big 3, we'll just call them the big 3. They're the best trio in the league in terms of offensive firepower. They're pretty awesome to watch. This Adelaide team is almost number 1 right now on my list of who's Adelaide playing. I need to make sure I watch this game.
Yeah, the issue that we've had with Adelaide this whole time has been defensively. They've been pretty bad. This is one of their best defensive games, especially against this Illawarra Hawks team that is now healthy with Trey Kell back in the lineup. This was a really good defensive performance from Adelaide. That I think spoke volumes. Can they keep this up? Can this be something that's consistent? We'll have to wait and see. But at the very least, that was a step in the right direction. That was a really positive sign for this Adelaide team because I didn't think they had the capacity to do that. Do I still have questions about their depth? Yes, I do. Do things become a little bit ISO heavy at times? Sure. But if they're able to pick up these wins at home, they look like a really solid offensive team. And like you said, they have go-to guys who know how to create advantages in their little vacuums, right? So you know that Kendrick Davis coming off on balls is going to be able to create an advantage, bend the defense, and they'll generally get a decent look out of what he does there. Montrezl Harrell is one of, if not the most unstoppable guy on the block in the league today. I think just his strength is something that a lot of opposing bigs are having difficulty containing. And then when it's not the strength, it's the face-off game. And, everyone knows that he's going to face up. He's going to, in and out, and he's going to sort of sway you to sleep and get something on you, whether it's an and one, whether it's just drawing a foul. And then I think Vasiljevic, this was one of his best games of the season, the shot making in that first half. And then at the end of the half, at the end of the game, coming off some of these down screens and these turnouts and just creating off that. And I think that's what they do best. When there's a 3-man action that has Kendrick Davis, Vasiljevic, and Montrezl Harrell, you're generally going to get something good out of that because all those guys are eyes on the rim. They're looking to score. I agree with you. Offensively, this team is cool. At home, they're amazing. They just don't lose at home. Let's see if they can keep up what they did defensively.
And perhaps the biggest challenge, or certainly the biggest challenge in this game, and you sort of pointed to it a little bit there, was they're going to get to the free throw line. And if you look at Illawarra offensively, and how much of it was Adelaide, how much of it was Illawarra, I'm not so sure. I still think Illawarra at times can be prone to taking in big moments, taking shots that just make you cringe a little bit. Like, why is that guy shooting that ball? Why are they not running offense? You've got Harvey, you've got Cal, you've got Sam Froling, who again was pretty good and pretty efficient in this game and was able to score against this defense, get these guys the ball. But then I'm also torn because you have a guy like Dave O'Hickey who has been so impactful, does every little thing that I'm like, yeah, this guy deserves to take some shots from time to time because he's doing every single other thing on the floor. So that's kind of where I'm at with the Illawarra Hawks. But the free throw discrepancy, that was going to be so difficult to overcome for this team. Illawarra shot relatively efficiently from 2-point range, over 50% from the floor. They were able to get the ball inside. Froling was 8 for 13. Cal was 7 for 11. I'm still, coming back from the injury that held him out for a little while. Harvey wasn't efficient, but when you're minus 21 in free throw attempts, I don't care. I'm not talking about the refs. I'm just talking about the pure math. That's going to be difficult to overcome in this game, and that set the tone early that Adelaide were the physically dominant team getting to the rack and getting the calls.
Yeah, and it's what kept Adelaide in the game in that first quarter too.
Yeah.
I want to say of those, how many free throw attempts? 30 some odd attempts.
30.
I want to say 12, 14 of them were in the first quarter.
Yeah.
Just when Illawarra started that game and looked like they were almost going to run away with it a little bit. And so credit to Adelaide as well for head on the rim, basically force the refs to make a call. They did that. I do think there is a part of this where the refs are scared of Montrezl Harrell. I think Montrezl will get calls because the refs are scared of him. And I'm not saying he probably deserves the call, but I think Montrezl will get the benefit of the doubt because of that.
Can I just say with Montrezl Harrell, one of the things that I really appreciate and I enjoy watching is the level of disgust he has, like genuine disgust. Like it really pisses him off when anyone in this league, no matter if it's a little guy, it's a big guy, it's a all defense player, or it's the worst defender in the league, he's disgusted if anyone even tries to guard him. Like he can score on any player from any team, and he will be shaking his head. He'll be staring him down, and there is a big intimidation factor there. But I just like the open disgust that anyone would even try and slow down this man. It's fun. He is an entertainer, and it's cool to watch. If you're an LA 36ers fan right now, you'd be buying those tickets. You'd want to find any way to be close to the floor, just so you can like listen to him and see the way he acts on the floor. It's cool. It's cool for the league.
Yeah, and again, how sustainable this is as far as what they do defensively and their depth, we'll wait and see. But at the very least, that sugar hit that they're getting from their stars doing their thing offensively, they are absolutely worth the price of admission. They do sell out that crowd, so credit to them for that. But that's why people go to these games. And yes, and there is that's the difference between entertaining and winning, right? Right now, 36 is doing both largely, which is great. But Montrezl getting scored on 3 straight possessions, guarding on balls, that is problematic. So show your disgust when someone tries to stop you, but also show a bit of effort when you're trying to guard others too. But that's the long term view of the 36ers. Can they keep up what they did defensively against the Hawks going forward? That's it. That's the key to their success.
And what he is going to be, Harrell is going to be a villain, which we love. That's why we love Chris Goulding when he goes into opposition buildings. Montrezl Harrell in the postseason, if this Adelaide team is there, there's going to be some fireworks, which is going to be really cool to see. So Adelaide, at the moment, certainly box office, they're a team that you want to watch. A team that then this is the last NBL team I want to hit, unless you've got any news around the league. But this Sydney Kings team, I'm going to say the last 2 years. So since Chase Buford left, honestly, this team has not looked really at any stage like a team that is happy, a team that is enjoying playing basketball, a team that enjoys playing basketball with each other. They win games and the coach is still unhappy. The players then have to field those questions. It's just like the team is so talented. Cam Olgun now is playing 10 minutes in a game, scoreless. This just feels, the longer it goes, because I keep on watching, I'm like, all right, they'll be able to turn it around. They're figuring it out. Gorge, I'm cool. Have a big rotation, then shorten it down. But he shortened the rotation. They really only played Liafa, Bruce, and Noy off the bench the other night. And they're still not happy, even when they win games and Jalen Odom bails them out. This team just feels like it's got a stink to it. And I don't know, unless you're inside, what's going on. But the longer the weeks go on, I'm just wondering when it's going to flip, when it's going to change.
So I went to a practice last week. Things seemed positive. The vibes genuinely did feel good. And I've been to practices where they haven't. As in, like, for other teams over the years, you know when a team either doesn't gel or things just aren't working there.
Yeah, for sure.
That's not what the feel is. Things still feel largely positive. I think where the angst is coming from is there is so much expectation on this team, not just from the outside, but internally. They know how good they can be. They know how good they should be. And the fact that it's taking them a little bit of time to get close to that is probably a bit frustrating. I think it's frustrating for the coaching staff, I think it's frustrating for the players. You know, you watch them in games and you think that, like, this lineup that's on the floor and this rotation that this team's playing, this team should be up 20 points right now. How are they not doing this better or doing that better? And I think in that game against the Phoenix, it resulted in missed open layups, just the easy things, right? There was that game a few weeks ago where they were just dropping the ball. They're going through this teething process, and I think it's just because where they want to be and where they should be, where their ceiling dictates they should be as a team, is just taking a little bit longer to get there. It still feels as though that there is enough hope within that organization and among the players, and all the vibes still seem to be high enough that they're confident that they can get there. Again, I think it's just the time that it's taken to do that. It's just a little bit frustrating.
So they've got, and I don't even, we've discussed them a lot over the last month or so I don't even have too much about the on-court stuff right now. But if I had to ask you, because they've got winners on this roster, guys that have won individual awards, guys that have been great team players, guys that have been unselfish. And I can't figure it out whether, when I watch the stretches in games where they are not rebounding, where are they just going to take terrible shot after terrible shot? And I don't know whether this is a team that you talk about the pressure, whether they come in and they have a sense of entitlement that they're just really good and they should just win these games on talent alone. I don't know whether it's laziness or I don't know whether it is the selfish stuff in the offense because they have so many guys and it's difficult to have so many talented guys that fit together. So I don't know, but the mix of guys we've seen play together. But also, they're not the first team that's come into a league with expectations. A few years ago, we had Jock Landau, and he's like, oh, we can go undefeated. That team was awesome. But they went on to win because from the start of the season, they just played defense. They ran offense. And even a guy like Jock Landau didn't need to dominate games. He didn't need to get the most shots of the team night in, night out. But they just got it done. So this Sydney Kings team just has to play basketball as a team because we haven't seen it to this point in time. And I don't know what the reason is for, but it's just, like I said, it just feels off. And it wouldn't surprise me if we come in this week and they win by 20 points and rip off 6-7 wins in a row. That's how talented they are. I'm just wondering when it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's why they brought Xavier Cooks in. It's why they brought Brian Goorjian in. This was I think last season, I don't think this team wins that game against the Phoenix last season. I don't think they have.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I don't think they have like the winners on that team, the guys who can really just lift everybody. And that's what Xavier Cooks was supposed to be. You bring back Jalen Adams, who just by his nature is a really chilled guy. But you bring Xavier Cooks in, who by his nature is a really competitive guy. And you saw toward the end of that game, everyone was sort of lifting each other. It's what Brian Goorjian is there for. I don't know how many coaches out there have the authority to sit Cam Oliver in a game like that, to play him sub 11 minutes. All right, that's a really tough thing to do. And I spoke with Cam Oliver about this yesterday for a story on ESPN.com.au, and he acknowledged everything. He acknowledged that I need to bring more energy. I know what I have to do to stay on the floor, and I'm not currently doing that. It seemed genuine. He doesn't seem like he's complaining about it. He understands what he has to do, that he's not doing it, and that there are expectations that you need to fulfill to play on a Brian Goorjian team. And right now, he's not meeting that. So it's ultimately you want to be in this situation right now. You want to go through this sort of teething and go through this sort of, I say, adversity right now, where you can acknowledge that you're not playing the best basketball, but there are 1, 2, 3 things that you can do to play your best basketball, but still, in this case, still winning the game, right? So you don't really hurt yourself in the long run. This was a pretty ideal outcome. I feel like this does put the Kings in a good position to fix some of the foundational issues that they're dealing with while not dropping games that they absolutely shouldn't be dropping.
Yeah, I thought, you brought up a good point early in the chat there that certainly from the outside, from what the media is hearing, from what the fans are hearing, from what they're saying in the press conference, even if there are some tiny little cracks on the inside that have the potential to become big cracks, they're certainly holding it together from a public-facing standpoint, which does mean something. We've seen other situations where it's not the case. So, yeah, the Kings have still won enough games that it's certainly not panic stations, and they're not in the worst spot of all time. But if you're a Kings fan, you'd certainly be a little troubled, I would say that. I did say we we're going to get to Dyson. Let's park it. Let's have a bigger NBA chat at some point in time. All I will say is, you tweeted about it the other day. We had Dyson Daniels and nothing but net last week. This man is just cooking defensively. He had 7 steals. The next night he had 6 steals. He leads the league in steals, leads the league in deflections. No doubt, if the season finished right now, he'd be first team all defense. And he said that's his goal. He wants to be first team all defense. He wants to lead the league in steals. But we'll have a bigger chat, Olgs. But he's been awesome. It's really fun to watch. A guy play defense.
We'll expand on this either next week, the week after, but the fact that he came into the season and could be an all-defense guy, and then after a few games, could he be first-team all-defense? Yeah. And now it's like, could he be Defensive Player of the Year? The expectations are slowly growing based on his performance, and it's very fun to watch him play basketball. He's the biggest pest in the NBA right now. So I'm excited to talk. We'll let the numbers continue to rack up. We'll let that sample size grow. Because if that sample size continues to grow and those numbers look largely similar, man, he's in for some. He's got that trophy cabinet is going to grow and grow, but it's really fun to watch.
Well, there's so many Aussies doing great stuff across the NBA, so that's why I think we should park it. We'll have a bigger chat here in the next week or so on this podcast, ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour. Make sure you check out Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops this Thursday night as well. We'll get into more of the stuff from the NBL. Olgun's going to be there. Ron Brockhoff will be back in studio this week. Beck Allen is going to join the show as well. So it's going to be a lot of fun on Thursday night on ESPN. And if you want to catch the chat with Dyson Daniels from last week, it's on the ESPN Australia YouTube page. Olgs' stuff is over at ESPN.com.au as well. So let's face it, no shortage of content from last week leading through to this week. Last NBL round before the FIBA break as well, Olgun. So let's hit this one with some momentum. Maybe that's a perfect time to do the NBA chat during the FIBA break. There we go. We're working out the schedule on the fly.
Probably. We'll probably touch on some of the FIBA Asia Cup qualifier stuff. I'm heading to Canberra on Wednesday to check some under 15 Oceania stuff. And then I'm getting to that Sydney Illawarra game, which I think is the game of that round. Illawarra coming off a loss, Sydney coming off an unconvincing win. Both teams want wins going into the FIBA break. You want that win going into that FIBA break, so you feel happy about it. That's going to be a really fun game. I'm excited. I'm getting around New South Wales and Canberra. I'm excited.
No, that's great. I've got a few games in the docket this week. Last point for me, I'm looking at obviously Illawarra Kings on the Saturday night. I've got Melbourne and Adelaide on the Sunday. Certainly Melbourne needs to turn around that defense a little bit. And the Perth Wildcats and Southeast Melbourne Phoenix. That one's on Friday night. The Wildcats at home, tough to beat. But the Phoenix, they're trying to figure out, is this team legit? They've turned it around. All of a sudden, they're running a game or two out of the play-in. So, nonetheless, plenty of stories right across the NBL. You watch it all on ESPN, your home for hoops. That's going to do it for us today. Kane Pittman, Olgun Knowledge. We hope you enjoyed the show. Let us know on the socials what you think about all today's discussions, and we'll catch you all next week.